Morning, morning, monsters. A short one today, as it is a dark and dreary day of voting in the UK. And I mean that in every sense of the word. But we're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about is we are going to talk about Facebook ads and micro-targeting. And it doesn't just apply to Facebook ads, but Facebook ads are some of the most offensive in this category. It's not a very complicated subject. It's one that I think too many people, shall we say, dismiss. I just realized that I painted over my background like an idiot. Let's just wipe that out there for a sec and then we'll go here. Right. So micro-targeting and Facebook ads. So I've given a longer talk on this, but I'm going to give a very short talk this morning on this. The biggest issue with micro-targeting on ads is accountability. Oh, need to trim down that. So whenever I take out an advert in the newspaper, on TV, various places like that, we have pretty strong regulatory bodies around what is allowed and what is not allowed in advertising. And there's good reasons for that. We didn't one day invent the advert and then instantly have advertising regulation bodies. We invented adverts, and basically a lot of people misused adverts over the years, and we came up with regulatory bodies to stop these abuses of advertising. Things like children under, actually I should do this as a separate slide because we will almost certainly need to return to this slide. Children under 12, real and fake. They cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is fake. Generally speaking, the under 12 is a rough guideline. Some regions put it under 8. The studies, like in any of these things that we talk about, there's always a classic sort of bell curve distribution, and 12 sits, I believe 12 sits somewhere here, whereas like 9 or 8 sits somewhere here. So it depends where you draw the line on the curve, so to speak. So yeah, children under 12 can't tell real and fake advertising. Another issue is, basically truth and lies. Now, generally, most regulatory bodies will have a pretty broad band of what's considered true and lie, as in they will err on the side of allowing people to say things. But there has to be bald-faced lies are basically meant to be regulated and avoided. You can't say the sky is green, for example. Likewise, if there is a large amount of scientific evidence or if there is a scientific consensus, you can't say that, something against that. This is one of the areas that's probably been pushed the hardest in recent years because some things are quite hard to prove, A or B, right? But it's an area we do regulate normally. Then depending on your country, but the UK, among others, is what that is, comparative advertising. So comparative advertising is basically where you go, our product is better than competitors' product. Basically, most countries, the US doesn't have this law, but most countries realize that comparative advertising is not useful because depending on how you measure two things, you can always say one is better than the other. All right. So generally speaking, most countries disallow this form of advertising because it is, in almost all the academic studies that they've done, just wrong. It normally gives a misleading image. And so basically South African advertising agencies, by the way, they were some of the leading ad agencies in the world. I don't know if that's still true, but at least a decade ago, and for the last sort of 2-3 decades, they've had a strong reputation in the area. And we had a no comparative advertising law, as does the UK, and some of the ads that came out of that were great, especially the car ads battling against each other. They did some very intelligent things to skirt around this ad, because all of these laws and all these regulations will be pushed to the absolute limit by everyone, because that's what we do, right? That's human fucking nature. That's what we do. And then the final issue is around association. There are other issues, but association is basically the laws here get a bit fuzzier, but there is a bunch of laws around. We know that when you associate something with something, it's a positive feeling, right? So this is commonly used. Coffee adverts use this to extreme. They take wonderful wonderful imagery of waking up, smells, bright lights and all that stuff, and associate. But there's other associations like political parties, religious groups, things like that are regulated in a variety of ways. So to recap, children under 12 generally can't be advertised to unless they're very, very strict guidelines, because of this real and fake dissociation. Truth and lies are usually regulated. Comparative advertising is usually regulated. So yeah, the Mac versus PC ads were not allowed in South Africa, for example. We saw them because the internet's a thing, but yeah, that kind of comparative advertisement's not allowed. Actually, I think you might be able to skirt that slightly, considering PC is not an actual brand you're comparing to, but I'd have to double check that. But yeah, you generally can't compare against the competitor. And association. Right, so to go back to our previous point, with advertising, one of the biggest things that is there is accountability. If I take an ad out in a newspaper or on a billboard or whatever, everyone can see it. Everyone can see the viewpoint that I'm espousing, and the regulatory bodies can regulate that ad. It's very manageable and easy to do that. And they can find that and they can do that in whatever way. The other issue is what I'd call acceleration, I believe I called it in my talk. You could call this gravity, you could call this sort of center or whatever. But yeah, the short version is that if I put a billboard out in the middle of the city, everyone's going to see that, right? And that means that I have to tamper my message to account for all of the people I'm trying to advertise to, right? Which means that, let's say I'm making a milkshake. I know that some people like it really, really sweet. Some people like it really, really pink. Some people like it a little bit savory. And I have tailored the taste of my milkshake to round about there. And I know that they associate this, and this with their milkshake, right? I know the different demographics and how that'll generally skew, and I'll come back to the slide in a sec. How that'll generally skew is like, I know these guys have these marketing preferences here, and I know there's this group here, and I know that there's this group here, and then this group here, and now two-dimensional representation of this is actually really inadequate. There's usually like a complex relationship. And I can go, well, if I target my advertising roughly here in terms of sentiment, right, I can hit the largest group of people. I miss out on this group, but that's a compromise, because I know that if I go too far there, I'll potentially lose a lot of this audience. And that basically works for us, right? But in acceleration, when I can do hyper-targeting, what happens? What we deal with in accountability and targeting is, as I say, in a normal sense, you sort of place your view there. We'll come back to that, because I don't want to go into the various ways that this all breaks down until we get into the last bit. So you've got your accountability, you've got your acceleration and then you have your you've got your accessible space. Accessible space. And what does this mean? I've probably misspelled that in some way. Who the fuck cares? Not very good with spelling. Accessible space is basically saying that the spaces in which you're advertising are public, generally speaking. They're in newspapers, they're in billboards. No one is coming into your bedroom and putting advertisements up, right? There is a sanctuary from advertising, generally speaking. You can turn off the TV. It is quite easy to escape advertising if you put your mind to it, right? And this last one is going to be a bit of a bone of contention, right? So let's attack how Facebook breaks these down individually. Right, so the first one is accountability. In accountability, so immediately, and I'm not going to focus on the UK elections, but immediately we know, for instance, that 80% of Tory ads on Facebook for this election have been on purely just the false true spectrum, been ruled by the advertising agency as unable to be aired. As in, like, if these ads were put forward for television, they wouldn't air, right? We see similar numbers around so supplements suffer a similar issue where supplements and medication, anything to do with health, has quite strong regulations. Additionally, we see children and unboxing videos, or unboxing content, or children's ads on Facebook. This is another area where the bulk of the adverts placed in digital spaces would not pass muster on traditional media. They wouldn't. They would fall up against various regulation standards we have there. I'll just put that as that, so that's clear if anyone's reading it. Right. Supplements, children unboxing, and we also health, children, politics was the other area that we see a lot of disruption in these ads on. Oh, yes. Legal. So this is around, there's various scams. One of the classic scams in the UK, for example, is the legal name scam, where, because a lot of immigrants, for a variety of reasons, use a pseudonym on their applications and such. There's other people who use various legal name stuff. There is people who have had a divorce who change the name, variety of LGBT people who change the name. There was a whole scam with billboards going around and stuff like that, where they were dodging, and they eventually got banned, but they continue online around legal name scams. These kind of legal opinions or scams, again, very heavily regulated on traditional advertising, but they get away with it on Facebook because of a lack of accountability on that. So then acceleration. So I mean, if I come back to this slide here, in this situation where we've got these dots, what I can now do in the world of Facebook is I can say, you get an ad, you get an ad, you get an ad, and you get an ad. And previously I wasn't able to go after this. Now, as I say, we have targeted by geographic region in some aspects, but this also kept society somewhat balanced, because if I put an ad up in London or I put an ad up in Newcastle, my brand may be portraying a slightly different viewpoint, but the juxtaposition is very obvious because we can see, people who travel between London and Newcastle, they see the two different ads and they're like, well, that's kind of shitty. Also, newspapers and other people would report on it, right? So geographic targeting has happened, but it's been a lot more obvious when we've done this kind of thing. And acceleration in this field happens very specifically to the point where if it's a low cost ad and we can customize it, and there's various adverts that are hyper customizable at the moment, you can even target like a small group of 2 people down here with a slightly different variant. And we see this all the time with A/B testing of ads. Probably the most common one that is the most, I'll say, innocent, but you decide, is generally what you'll do is you'll have slightly different graphics, where you'll have one where it's like, oh, here's a ball and a stick, and then you'll have another one where here's 2 balls, and you'll have another one with here's 2 sticks, and then you'll have another one where it's like, oh, here's a stick and a ball and a stick, right? And then you go through those and you basically run all of those ads sort of side by side, and you pick the ones that have the biggest reach and stuff. This is just called A/B testing. It's very, very typical. And it happens with traditional advertising as well. But what happens with, this happens all over the place. It's very, very common practice, but digital spaces have accelerated this kind of fracturing. What will often happen is brands will unconsciously tap into a specific bias, right? So a brand, and they'll do color variations and things like that. A brand may find that one of their ads, without even them knowing, reinforces some kind of stereotype or some kind of negative imagery. So for instance, this one might just be because it looks like a guy going yay, but it could also be because it's slightly sexist or slightly shall we say not center, basically not center, because people most strongly identify with advertising that is personalized to them. There's a reason this works. And so this kind of A/B testing can actually drive people further towards margins. Studies have shown when you do this kind of segment testing, and especially if you're not looking for a centralized thing, you're looking for what tests well with individual groups, and you're willing to run different copy, you can go through that. And this has got so advanced, by the way, there are now ad platforms, Facebook included, that have this as an option where you set up and they automatically manage the running of different copy. And not everyone has access to these tools because some of these tools are business only and but yeah, and there's also advertising middleware that'll do this for you, but it's that fucking common. So yeah, we are all being tweaked, and the thing we're seeing is different. So we've already covered accountability and acceleration. This acceleration is what leads to sort of social fragmentation, right? It leads to us thinking, what the fuck are other people thinking? Because we can't agree with them. We just can't. And that's because our commonality has been torn apart, right? If these adverts were in the town square, or if they were on channels we all saw and we all saw similar adverts, we would be shocked and appalled at what we saw. We would express that shock and appall, or if, to play the other side, if I'm horribly racist and I saw an ad with an interracial couple kissing, I'd be in shock and awe. And regardless of which side I'm on, being exposed to the other side loving or hating a thing will move me slightly towards more center, and will move them slightly towards more center. And so it would maintain social cohesion. And especially, we like to dismiss geography, but geography is really important because they're your neighbors, right? They're the people who you mix with. It's one of the sort of most natural, social fragmentation areas. There's areas where we sort of have white suburbs, and we redline areas, and we do all kinds of other behaviors where we split people up, right? Wrong side of the train tracks and all that. But geography is one of the hardest segmentations to do, and to maintain, especially given our modern legal framework, because we have so much stuff to fight it. So if we have strong geographical associations where everyone in Cambridge agrees a certain thing, that leads to that goes well. It fits our democracy well. It fits our representational democracy well. It fits the parliamentarian system, which a lot of countries use very well. There's a reason why geographical clustering works. It leads to stabilization of societies. And it's very easy to be exposed to different viewpoints if the viewpoints are sort of centered around geographies, because travel is a natural way that people sort of get exposed. But yes, then the last point that I'll hit on this before we wrap on this particular subject is accessibility. Now, accessibility is normally about your ability to get to something, but this is more about their ability to get to you. Traditional media, billboards and external facing, video and print. Right. So print is probably one of the easiest to escape because it was in the newspaper, it was in things like that. You could very quickly ignore it. You could toss it aside. And there was a sort of regulation between amount of ad space and amount of content. But regardless, if you didn't feel up to it, you just didn't read the newspaper, right? You could sort of glance at the front page, you could go through the headlines or whatever, but you could skim through it. Same is true with television, right? And video, and even I would say YouTube. It is important. It's nice to have. We almost certainly watch television or YouTube, but it is easy to escape it. It is easy to turn off. And in the case where anything was super important, like it was the news or it was state television or it was a big YouTube channel or whatever, there's regulation that starts kicking in about, well, not so much with YouTube, that's a whole other issue, but there's regulation that kicks in about amount of advertising and such and whatnot. But again, it becomes problematic, but it's there. Probably the hardest one was billboards. And again, this is an area where I think America loses out a bit because their regulation around billboards and physical space advertising isn't the best. They do have it, though. It is important to say they do have it. Like, there are spaces you cannot put billboards. There's amount of control of billboards. Things like billboards along the side of the road, how many you could have, how obnoxious they could be. That's all controlled. And in the UK we have even firmer controls, and ultimately when you get home you do escape it. The problem, however, becomes when Facebook is your friend group, right? When the only way you can associate with your core circle of friends is through Facebook. And there's many people who are in this situation. You'd be shocked at how many people have to log into Facebook to conduct their social lives. And it is the first thing they see when they wake up, and it is the last thing they see when they go to bed. Huge amount of people. And I could do a whole nother talk on susceptibility in early REM state, early, I forget the word now, not REM, pre-REM state, when you're lucidity periods. There's an issue around lucidity periods with sleep, going to sleep and coming in and out of sleep, and also pregnancy. Oh my god, there's a whole thing we could talk about pregnancy and the increased use of social media around pregnancy and traditional marketing towards pregnant women. But regardless, what we are going to say here is you cannot escape the advertising on Facebook because you are using it as a communication tool and as a primary sort of daily driver tool, if you are, which a lot of people are. And that's where the accessibility thing becomes a problem. They can access you at any time. You cannot escape the advertising. And that becomes part of the saturation effect. And that's really bad. That's like really, really bad in terms of psychologies. Should I not be listening to this before bed? yeah, I mean, stuff you listen to before bed has a higher chance of sticking, much like stuff you expose yourself early to in the morning. So you should potentially be exposing yourself to good and bad things. Good things before bed and good things when you wake up, and you should try and limit your exposure. It's one of the reasons why meditative practices before going to sleep, or having a good routine to sort of clear out your head, like brushing your teeth and cleaning the kitchen and doing like stuff, and then turning off all the lights and going to bed and thinking about your day and thinking about your problems is useful, because it sort of primes your brain to do that clean out period in a positive and functional way. But yeah, so there's more individual bits we could dump into, but I don't want to bore everyone. And as I say, these are really the three core issues with that Facebook advertising and micro-targeting. We could go deeper into individual ones, and if people have questions, we can jump into bits and pieces. But for now, I wanted to keep it light and short. And if there's any questions on the live before we end the recording, shoot, because as I say, those of you on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, we do ask questions at the end of this, and it is a live thing, so come join us on Twitch. Right. So beard face lies are more difficult to spot because the beard is in the way. Nice. I answered the Mac and PC question earlier. Mac versus PC ads are competitive advertising or comparative advertising, and generally that kind of advertising is not allowed in most countries. It's allowed in the US. I'm not 100% sure about the Mac and PC ads though, because PC is not necessarily a brand, but I'd have to check on that. You wouldn't be able to go IBM and Mac, and you definitely wouldn't be able to go Microsoft and Mac. I'm on holiday. I'm not on any kind of sick leave. I've just had a rough day or two. Netflix does do A/B testing for thumbnails. As I say, this kind of framework has become super common to the point where there are middlewares you can purchase that will automatically run A/B testing for you. The algorithms aren't very complex and can be implemented yourself. And as I say, if you're A/B testing towards a common, broadly marketed thing, you don't suffer the problem I'm talking about. However, if you are A/B testing for what we call cohorts or segments, then you can drive things apart and you can unconsciously appeal to certain weird things. For instance, if you had a computer, and this has been done, artificially generate your copy based on thumbnails in your video, or based on content, like let's say you put in some keywords for stock photos to go through, and it was like, oh, you're interested in women in the kitchen, say, and you had a whole bunch of stock photos that went through, and while all those stock photos will be PG, there might be some more salacious or sexist content in there that is more clickable for people, either through outrage or through appeal, and so that might artificially get selected. And that is not a pulled out of thin air example. That is from an actual study I've seen where people were implementing generative thumbnails. Right. I mean, Steve Jobs inventing the PC's a bit bollocks, because PC history, but that could be another whole talk. We're going to stop the recording there. So if you are on YouTube, come join us live on Twitch next time. We do this in the mornings, usually around 8:20, 8:30 start. I'm going to try pick a time more rigidly, and it normally runs for half an hour. So take care, monsters.